Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is for you. This week I was reminded again of our deep need for human connection. When I dropped off my boys at school this week, it felt odd driving into a near empty parking lot, and I hardly bumped into any of the parents that I usually bump into, and we didn't have any chit-chat that we normally have. And I do see their teachers, and they're probably smiling back at me, but I can't see theirs, nor can they see my smile. And I usually wave goodbye to them from the other side of the chain link fence. Then I walk to my car, and then I drive off. And this morning routine is really efficient, but it feels very sterile. I really miss that human connection. So God created us as social beings. We have this innate desire to come together, to seek God, to seek other people, and to commune with God and with each other. So I'm sad. I lament that we're still unable to meet as we have, because I long for that day when we can connect again as we used to. And I know that day will come as God allows it. But so in the meantime, we'll continue to connect in this way, the way that we're doing. But we have to remember we're much more than just faces on the screen. So we're taking steps one step at a time and trusting in our pandemic transition team. So what I want to do is, let's go back to last week. Let's go back to our last week's learning about mountaintop experiences. We've all had these high points in our lives when we have an awakening. It's those unique special moments when all of your senses are heightened and you feel this deep insight and clarity. You feel as if your soul is filled and you're connected so deeply to God. For me, I can name a few of those instances. When I was 15, God grabbed hold of me. He came into my life and He touched my heart and invited me to follow Him. And it was a really powerful moment because God had really brought me to my knees. And I still remember the exact location. I remember the time of day, the room, and the very spot where God overwhelmed me with His love. And this was a moment in faith that faith really came alive for me. So let's fast forward about 2 decades. God again would invite and come knocking on my door again. And through the influence of the mentors in my life, the signs were so clear. It was so clear to me that God was inviting me to make a change, to change my career path and to enter into full-time ministry. Again, I remember my mountaintop experience. It was actually in my home. I was actually standing in my shower stall, and with water running down my face, I came to that moment. It came to that moment where I stood before God and said, yes. Yes, God, I am ready, I'm willing, I'll go. And these I hang on to as some of the high points in my life, which really has deepened my faith. So Peter, James, and John, they also had this experience on the mountain. Jesus took them up to the mount and showed them His glory. And this generated incredible excitement and clarity. And Jesus did this to infuse faith, to give them a reinforced faith, because they will need this in the days ahead when their faith will be tested. And they will need this resiliency as they head back down to live in the valley. So life will return to normal when we go back to the valleys and plateaus. You know, we love being on top of the mountain. It's the place where we feel so close to God's heart. But we have to remember, life is not a series of mountaintop experiences. Instead, they're kind of long walks through the valleys and the plateaus and the foothills. And very occasionally, we'll take treks up to the mountain where we will have a communion and closeness with God. But after that brief moment, we all come back down. Life in the valley where work and life continues. So life in the valley, it feels very different. It isn't that glamorous, it's not that exciting, and it can be stressful, and it can be also mundane. It can be really busy, but it can also feel very routine. So life in the valley is about stacks of dirty laundry. It's about bills piling up. It's about used face masks hanging in my rear view mirror. So we're all in this valley together, but the valley feels odd and strange. It's not what we're normally used to. And the pandemic really has turned everything on its head. So we are living in this liminal time, a time where everything is in constant flux. Everything that we've known is changing, so we always have to pivot and adjust. And it's taxing. It's so hard to feel settled. We are at home, but it feels so unfamiliar. It's almost as if we are living in exile. We are displaced from our norms. So the title of my sermon is Living in this Strange Valley. Living in this strange valley. We'll be looking at the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, chapter 29, verses 4 to 7. And here Jeremiah, he encourages people to settle in this strange valley. He wants them to adjust and move forward. And this is not easy because it's a tremendous, huge adjustment that they have to make. So let's review the backstory a little bit. The Israelites basically have been kicked out. All of them. They've been evicted and sent off into exile by the Babylonians. So Jerusalem has been sacked and the Jews are sent away. They either leave or be killed. So they leave. But they have no idea when things will get back to normal. So that's the background. They have to move forward, adjust, and pivot. So they have to make do, get back to life as they hope for. So here's my main idea. My main idea is this. In these changing and uncertain times, God reminds us to embrace our present situation and to hold on to the long-term hope for the future. And we do this by serving and seeking the shalom of others. So this is the main idea for this week. So we are living in these very unusual times. The valley isn't the way it used to be. We're not sure how things will look in the years ahead. And the passage in Jeremiah 29 is quite familiar to me. I've meditated in the past before, but this week God really impressed it upon my heart and mind as I began to seek what God wants us to do. And I think this passage gives us some good guiding points in how we are to move forward and to live and to engage our world. So I feel that our situation has many parallels with what has happened with the Israelites. They were sent off to this foreign land and now living amongst foreigners. They couldn't go back to the temple to worship God. And they were isolated. They were cut off from pretty much all the people that they've known. And they wondered what this meant. What does it mean to be the people of God? So here we are. We're in a different time, not in exile, but we do feel similar vulnerabilities. To be exiled means you're cut off. You're exposed. You feel vulnerable. And we do feel cut off. We feel cut off from many things, from our friends, our family, the people that we love. We're cut off from our regular ways that we normally do things. And we can't gather. We can't come to church, nor can we worship God in our usual ways. And like the Israelites, we have no idea. We have no idea when this will end. A year, 2, 5, 7, who knows? And most importantly, what are we supposed to do? As people of faith, what do we do now? So let's look at the prophetic voice of Jeremiah. Here he offers God's instruction in kind of two parts. In verse 5 to 9, he talks about the present moment and the near future. And then in verse 10 and onwards, he talks about the distant future. So I'm going to focus on just the first part, verses 5 to 9. The first section here, which I'm going to summarize as settling in the valley. Settling in the valley. So the advice to settle in suggests that the situation's not going to end soon. It's very clear from verse 10 that it will be a long time. And in verse 10, God says He will restore them. He will bring them back, but after 70. Yes, after 70 years. So with the exception of children, this is the way that's going to be for the rest of their lives. And this is the reality that they have to deal with in their valley. They can't hold on to those false hopes, hoping, well, it will magically pass and it'll go away. It won't. So as unwelcome and as difficult as it is, they have to move forward. Verse 5, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in numbers there, do not decrease. So you can see Jeremiah is so optimistic, maybe overly optimistic, and to the point where he sounds absurd and illogical. Build houses, settle down, plant gardens and enjoy produce? How? They are refugees. How does he expect them to do this when they're in a foreign land? They have no money, no motivation. They don't even speak the language. But Jeremiah insists. He insists that they move forward and to build and rebuild. Build as if you were back in Jerusalem. Well, not exactly the way it was in Jerusalem, because it will never be the old days of Jerusalem, but they need to adapt and move forward. He doesn't want them to resign to their situation or to just drag their feet. God wants the opposite. He calls them to push out, to pursue and make the best of it. They are to set new roots, to build and to increase. And this is hard. This is no easy task. It will require creativity and thinking way, way outside of the box. And I feel the same about our own situation. We need to trust God to lead our families, our churches, our communities into this world. So we have to try creative things. We have to experiment. We have to fail and try again, because we're not going to get it right every time. I subscribe to South China Morning Post, and I love this channel because they tell the human stories. They feature real people and stories of life which really connect to our hopes and fears and dreams. And there was a moving story which I came across this week. It's a story from the slums of Indonesia. And I won't say too much more, but it's amazing to see what can emerge out of the ashes. Let's watch.
Kalau kita kayak ngumpulin sampah berserakan biasa, kayak cuma amal diri kita sendiri. Tapi kan kali ini kan juga selain amal, kita juga bisa dapat kuota gratis.
Kesulitannya itu kalau kita masukin kuota belum sebulan habis, kita tidak beli lagi, nggak bisa lagi masukin kuota. Nah makanya dalam seminggu ini kita kasih jarak itu seminggu 3 kali, karena khawatir dalam pertengahan habis kuotanya sudah selesai tidak bisa belajar. Nah ini yang bikin kesulitan. Mudah-mudahan ada pihak-pihak lain yang mau bantu kami, jadi bebas gitu loh, anak-anak itu lebih banyak, kuotanya lebih banyak dan muridnya pun akan lebih banyak.
It's so inspiring, isn't it? So if you're grumbling about being stuck with these online classes, I hope these kids offer you some new appreciation for what you do have. And my heart truly goes out to these poor families and kids who want a better future, but the odds are completely stacked against them. They didn't grow up privileged, they don't have much opportunity, but they tried. They were creative, they pursued, they pressed forward to make a future. Jeremiah says, plant gardens and eat their produce. So basically he says, be fruitful. I think about what our church has done with our vegetable garden. It's truly a community effort this summer. All the crop that has been harvested, pretty much all the things that have been grown, isn't for our own consumption. Instead, it's used to bless the community. And this is what I feel that we as Christians are called to do, to go out there, build partnerships, and bring welfare to the city. So if Jeremiah could step into our time, into our pandemic, he would probably say something like, don't stop here. Create art, compose music, produce videos, build new businesses, and invest. So let's remember that your businesses isn't just to make a buck. It's not just to turn a profit, but it's to create opportunities that will bless our community. And the same could be said about your work and your job. The purpose of your work isn't just for personal gain. It's not just to feed your family. No, our work is also for the benefit of others. As we do our part, we have to keep verse 7 in mind. We seek the welfare and the shalom of the city. So what we do in our church and our families must flow out for the betterment of a better world. So let's look at verse 6 as it relates to the welfare of our city. Verse 6. Marry and have sons and daughters and wives for your sons, and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Now, I don't think marriage is overly difficult during an exile, but marriages in a pandemic, pretty much all the weddings this summer have been postponed for the future or for next year. So let me say a little bit about marriage. For those who are married and those who are planning to get married, I think we have to have a wider vision of what marriage is supposed to be. As a Christian, marriage is not and cannot be just a private arrangement between two people or two families. Nor is marriage just for the enjoyment of each other, though it's incredibly fulfilling. Marriage is much bigger than this. I have learned that marriage is an expression of the gospel to the world. Marriage is an expression of the gospel to the world. So the relationship that you have with your spouse is a witness of Christ's love. Christian marriage is a witness of God's faithfulness to others. Through God's grace, we're able to live out the vows that we made so that others can see the beauty of Christ. And this is a gift to our community and to our world. Your marriage is meant to bring God's peace, His shalom, to our city. So here's a question that you can ponder on. Is your marriage, think about your marriage, is it filling your community with peace, with love, with patience and respect? If God has blessed you with marriage, then we share ourselves with others so others can see God and see His beauty. Now let's look at what Jeremiah says about children. Increase in number. Do not decrease. So he admonishes people to grow in numbers and to grow in strength. Simply, Jeremiah says, have more babies, have more kids. Now, as modern listener, this sounds rather old and archaic. It may sound disempowering to women who have many aspirations beyond motherhood. So if you're imagining, or maybe you're thinking of the saying, barefoot and pregnant, I think you have to resist that thought. I don't think it's fair to superimpose a Western value system against a completely different culture and a different time. Personally, I see God's instruction to grow and invest in our children to be extremely empowering. Children are blessings from God. They are the future of you and me. They will become our future society. So there's a tremendous blessing that we bring. So raising your children to be God-honoring people will bring the welfare, the good welfare to our society. Upright and God-honoring citizens will always help our society to prosper, to grow, and to be caring. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine if the opposite happened. Imagine if a generation of parents abandoned their responsibility. Derelict, uncaring parents will sadly reap a generation of lost and displaced people. So Jeremiah's words are so important. It is our homes, inside our homes, where we raise, where we shape our next generation of husbands and wives, teachers and businesswomen, artists and musicians, cooks and farmers, pastors and counselors. So when we have this larger view of the welfare of our city, we can see how important our children are. If all of this sounds hard, verse 5 and 6 is hard, verse 7 will sound insulting and difficult. Verse 7. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So again, they are to seek the shalom and well-being, not of their own people, not of Jerusalem, but for Babylon, their enemies. So remember, the Israelites, they have no love for Babylon. They hate it. They instead long for Jerusalem. They want this injustice to end, and they long for the return of the king. So this is the complete opposite of what you would want to hear. What is said here probably is the closest thing to what Jesus taught us about loving our enemies and praying for those who persecute us. So what's the point of seeking the welfare of the city when in the future it will be doomed anyways? First thing, they have to change their perspective. We need to change our perspective. Rather than seeing themselves as victims, as refugees, they need to see themselves as residents. They are residents in this strange valley. They need to see themselves on a mission to Babylon and for Babylonians. And same with us. We are to see ourselves for a mission for Toronto, for Markham, for Richmond Hill, for Aurelia, for wherever you live. In the words of the theologian Walter Brueggemann, he said this: they should embrace exile as the place where God has placed them in the present. Embrace the exile. Embrace our COVID exile. Now this, of course, is so much easier said than done. So one of the things that we have to fight against is our inner voices, our fearful voices. We have to fight against those temptations and the voices which say, don't stick your neck out. Keep your head down and wait for this to blow over and pass over. So hold on, stockpile, keep it all, and just look out for yourself and your family. Now, thinking this way is tempting. Listening to these voices, I think, goes against what we're called by God, to live faithfully, to seek the welfare of others. And verse 7 reminds us that we are interconnected. This relationship between the success of the city relates to us, the success of the Israelites. Babylon and Israel are connected. The verse says, if the city prospers, so will you. So let's remember this. Remember this interconnectedness. We are not a ship by ourselves. You and I, we must make up this community so the health and the welfare of the city will grow. It will affect our own health and welfare too. So let us look outwards and seek the goodness of others. We are living in hard times, and it's a challenge. It challenges everything that we've ever known and everything we've been taught. But we have to remember that God is with us. God walks with us. No pandemic has lasted forever. No war or catastrophe has lasted forever. God has been with us all along. So in closing, let me share with you a perspective. This author is unknown, but he gives a perspective of what we hope for as we look back at some of our recent history and where we've come from. Imagine you were born in 1900 and you're 14. World War I starts, and ends on your 18th birthday. By the end, 22 million people killed. Later in the year, the Spanish flu epidemic hits and runs until you're 20. 50 million people die from the flu in these 2 years. When you're 29, the Great Depression begins. Unemployment hits 25%. The global gross domestic product drops 27%. The country nearly collapses along with the world economy. This runs until you're 33. When you turn 39, World War II starts. Between your 39th and 45th birthday, 75 million people perish in the war and the Holocaust, which kills 6 million. And now you're 52. The Korean War starts and 5 million perish. You're approaching your 62nd birthday. The world has the Cuban Missile Crisis, the tipping point of the Cold War. When you're 64, the Vietnam War begins. 4 million people die in that conflict. And as you turn 75, the Vietnam War finally ends. In these 7 decades, life on our planet as we know it could have well ended. Now think of everyone who was born in 1900. How do you survive all of this? Think of your grandparents and their parents. They got through this because they worked, settled in, and planted gardens and sought the prosperity of the city. So let us do the same. Let us work together. Let us be compassionate. Let us help others as we will get through all of this. In the history of the world, there has never been a storm that has lasted. This too shall pass. So, we're survivors. Humanity has survived an incredible amount. The church has survived all of this. How? How have we managed to survive for all of these centuries despite kingdoms rising and falling? The answer is simple but profound. Faithfulness. Not my faithfulness nor yours, but the faithfulness of God to His promises. And by His power and grace, He will be our God and we will be His people always. Amen.